sind sehr interessante Fragen drin. Und die anderen gucken wir uns dann irgendwann mal alles an. Aber wie gesagt, das geht 3 Stunden, das können wir über 3 Tage gucken. Alrighty guys, so next we're gonna watch a video. It's called This Is Your Brain on Trauma by HealthyGamerGG. So this time we're not gonna watch the video or the message that he was gonna say with this video. We're gonna watch the Q&A that is coming at the end. And I find the questions in here pretty interesting. So let's skip to those. And of course we're gonna watch the rest. Also der Mechanismus, der das Ganze kontrolliert, ist dann stärker oder schwächer.
There's consequences of untreated ADHD that will end up traumatizing. So at that point, we've kind of got both. Now, this also gets confusing because there are a lot of features of PTSD like emotional dysregulation, difficulty concentrating. So how can you tell the difference? So there are a couple of different things to keep in mind. The first is that it's not so important to really tease it out because many of the things that we will do to fix one, we would do to fix the other anyway. So a simple example is meditation, right? So meditation is a useful treatment for PTSD, CPTSD, borderline personality disorder, and ADHD. There are some specifics about the kind of meditation which you kind of need to understand, but generally speaking, the treatment is going to be the same. Dealing with shame, whether it comes from ADHD or PTSD, is going to be not the same, but it's in the same ballpark. Let's put it that way. So the treatments for the two will overlap quite a bit. The third thing is emotional dysregulation. That needs to be improved in both, right? So this is where the first thing to keep in mind is it is not necessary to perfectly tease these two apart before we intervene. And this is something that we learn in clinical medicine, right? So when you become a psychiatrist, you learn this. If you're not sure what the diagnosis is, lean into a treatment that treats both options. So SSRIs, does this person have an anxious depression, or do they have an anxiety disorder with an adjustment disorder laid on top? Who knows? In either case, SSRIs will treat both. So if we're going to start with something, let's start with an SSRI. So the treatments can overlap. Now, there are a couple of places where the treatments don't overlap. So for example, things like stimulant medication. And that's where it is important. So we can do things like neuropsychological testing, right? We can offer formal testing to detect the deficits of ADHD. We can also offer diagnostic scales of trauma and things like that. And so we can tease things apart in some way. But I'd say that practically, I've treated a lot of people where we're not sure what is causing what. And that's where, as a clinician, what we do is, okay, so if I think your diagnoses are ADHD and PTSD, we can start someone on stimulant medication. And then we see, right, what part of this does this fix? So if more of it is trauma-oriented, we would not expect ADHD medication to be that effective at improving things. So over time, it's like a process, right? And
what is ADHD medication? The number one thing was Ritalin, right? Was it Ritalin? Jo, danke Panelito. Ich mache einfach Videos auf YouTube, wie ich heule und dann klappt das. Debo sagt ja. So Ritalin. I actually took Ritalin once. No, I actually took it twice or 3 times maybe. And it was a very good experience. It was a very, very good experience. I used it during the time where I was doing my final exams. And I got it from some shady guy in the school, right? He said, yo, these are gonna make you feel more focused and everything. And they did. I never was so focused and could have done so much work without interrupting than I ever. It was insane, dude. Alles klar, Panna. And so that is the one thing that calms you down when you're wired, right? Now, what I find interesting is that so many people are coming out to say they have ADHD now. And in all honesty, I think everybody has ADHD in some magnitude. If it's small or a lot, Everybody wants attention, especially our generation, where our parents just let us sit in front of the TV instead of talking to us. Ain't that a source of becoming ADHD, getting ADHD symptoms? Or does it have to do with your chemical, how do you say? Is it the chemicals that make you hyperactive? And that is why it's called ADHD. The reason why I'm asking these questions and I have no clue what I'm talking about is because I never have really tackled the topic of ADHD, because I never thought it is going to be interesting for me. But I find it more and more interesting just because it's becoming more mainstream. Something becoming more mainstream does not mean it's good or like immediately more interesting for me, right? However, it is something that is just in my orbit, and I want to know what's going on, because so many people are saying that they have ADHD now. Children, adults, whoever, right? But the reason why I also liked the question or found it interesting was because of the trauma part. Because I definitely know I got some of them. All right, let's keep watching.
And that's why we really emphasize that you should work with a clinician. The advantage of working with a clinician is that they will collect more information over time and you will refine your diagnosis. And you absolutely could have both. Great question. Okay, next.
Man, my face.
Okay, I'm going to
looks so swollen
for the first time
oh,
soon. Do you have any advice? It's hard for me to open up and talk about myself or how I feel emotionally. So here's my advice if you're going to a therapist for the first time. So remember that the therapist has a job, and their job is to do their job. So you don't need to be great at opening up. You don't have to talk about yourself emotionally. It is their job to make you feel comfortable enough to where you open up whether you kind of want to or not. Second thing to keep in mind is that success in therapy is a skill. So the first time that you go ice skating, I wouldn't expect you to know how to ice skate. In the same way, going to therapy is something that you will get better at over time.
Yeah, you will get better at telling the truth and everything as well, which is very important.
Like one of the things that I'll put in their formulation and something that I'll let them know is that I think you utilize
can't hold anything
therapy
back,
very well, right? So people will get better at it. So my advice would be the most important part is showing up and then follow their lead.
And of course, getting to know each other,
what
right?
You're looking for. Let them know what works for you and
it
what
is a very
doesn't work
intimate.
for you. It's totally fine to even tell them, hey, I have difficulty opening up and talking about my emotions. That's totally fair game, right? So that's their job to.
Like, I have the appointment now with the therapist in a few days, and I already know all the things I'm gonna tell her. Like everything. I got it like in detail. And I'm gonna tell everything, like the truth, the everything. More than the truth, right? Because I want her to help me find a better path of coping with stuff. So if you're lying, you're only lying to yourself. And that is with so many things in life. So many.
Help you get better at that. Okay. What tactic would you take to heal CPTSD mixed with moral injury from a specific event? I'm confused about what moral injury from a specific event is.
Interesting.
What's the relationship between CPTSD, addiction, and sense of worthlessness?
Oh, he skips the question.
So the first thing to understand about trauma and addiction is that addiction is not a problem, it is a solution. So human beings get addicted to things for a couple of reasons. So you can absolutely make a genetic argument where there's a very strong, vulnerability, and once you get a taste, like the first drop of alcohol, and you're hooked. I've absolutely seen that. But for a lot of people, addictions are solutions before they become problems. So addictions give pleasure and take away pain. And the problem with CPTSD is that, remember, we have emotional dysregulation, We have difficulty. So there's two ways that people with trauma have difficulty with their emotions. The first is that their negative emotions in the more primitive parts of their brain, this is places like the amygdala, these are the parts of our brain that experience fear, anxiety, things like that. Those are very itchy. They've got itchy trigger fingers, so they can trigger very easily and very intensely. That's the first emotional deficit. Second emotional problem that people with trauma have is that their sense of self oftentimes carries with it a lot of shame and guilt and stuff like that. So this isn't like fear of the outside world. This is a persistent emotional negative state that I carry with me. That's actually a different part of the brain. It relates more to the default mode network. These are emotions that are called social cognitive emotions. So we have two types of emotions. We have our primitive emotions like anger and fear that even reptiles experience. And then we have a different part of our brain that has our social cognitive emotions: pride, guilt, shame. You can't have those emotions without a social component. I feel proud when people look at me.
It's
I
all
feel
social.
ashamed when people look at me. It requires socialization.
Yep.
So the people with PTSD have difficulty with that as well. The third thing that people with PTSD struggle with is feeling positive emotions. These come from a completely different region of the brain, the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex. So this is stuff like excitement, love, curiosity. People with trauma feel kind of like numbed out, right? So it's kind of like the real tragedy is you feel numbed out in terms of positivity.
Yeah.
But you've got a very itchy brain, and it's easy to activate some of these negative emotions. So where does addiction come in?
Predominantly just
Addiction
negative and
fixes
sad
all three.
feelings.
Right? So if we look at things like benzodiazepines, these are treatments for anxiety. And we developed benzodiazepines by recognizing that alcohol alleviates people's anxiety. So we developed a pill that basically activates the same receptor as alcohol, kind of chills you out.
Chill
Right? So we
Panalito,
know
das
we
ist zu
can
viel.
treat anxiety with certain
Du musst einen
psychoactive
Gang
substances.
runternehmen.
Next thing that psychoactive substances do is they will numb us, right? So this is also through the GABA receptor like alcohol, but there are other ways that they will sort of make us forget ourselves. That critical self-dialogue that is always running in our head goes away when we get high, for example. So they alleviate our negative emotions. The third thing that they help us do is feel positive emotions. So it's easier to feel like we're having a good time, we're vibing, we're relaxing, we're chilling, we're partying. Things like MDMA or ecstasy can help us feel connected to other people.
That was the
Right?
best
So
time,
if
dude.
you
Ecstasy
really
and
look at it, the
MDMA.
reason that trauma and drugs overlap so heavily is because drugs and addictions fix the problems of trauma, but only temporarily. So we'll also see this with things like people who have a history of trauma and have diagnoses of borderline personality disorder will engage with things like promiscuous behavior, intense, unstable relationships to help feel loved, right? Because when I'm head over heels in love with someone, I can feel better about myself.
And it's such a cliche too. You come out of the broken home, your father is an alcoholic, you're so much likely to also become an alcoholic. And it's like a gene, people said, right? Where though it's only behavior and only copying behavior. Jo, hau rein, Panalito. Danke, dass du da warst. Cheers. So, man, do drugs work? That is crazy, right? They do all the three things. They let you feel good, make you forget about the negative feelings. And what was the first thing he said? I can't get to the third right now. It doesn't matter. It's a problem solver, right? But you have to be ahead of them. You have to understand that it's only temporary and it's not going to fix anything. Nothing. In many cases, especially in, let's say, socially a little bit lower status people, where these sort of problems occur most often, it is actually going to be a detriment. You're going to lose money. You're going to lose people who like you. You're going to lose your job. yeah, these are now broad things that I'm mentioning, as in also maybe cliches, but that's just the truth. And this is absolutely right. Did we get a text? Yo, Alimova. I'm fine. How are you? I'm always bad, so don't ask me next time, okay? Thank you. All right, let's see.
So we see that if we look at the neuroscience of emotional challenges with PTSD, we see that addictions actually like fix all three of those. So there's a very high overlap. The problem
Yeah,
is
you get addicted
that
to it.
the fix from an
To
addiction
the fix.
is temporary and over time will get objectively worse.
Yeah.
Great question.
It's gonna get worse because you're gonna need more, and then you're gonna need more for the wrong reasons as well. And before you can understand it, you're hooked. And it's a bad time. Trust me. Trust me, I've been there. I don't need any drugs now. It's all good. It's better than ever. But you also have to
Okay.
You also have to have grown and to understand. And it is very hard to see when you're in this bad
How
of a
would you
position.
heal trauma from having been in an
understand.
incubator for a long time as a baby? I have no clue. I mean, that's really interesting. There's a lot of like interesting data about, you know, perinatal and post birth like stuff and correlations with things like learning disabilities and stuff like that. I don't think I've ever seen a clinical case where like we thought that the trauma originated at the level of an incubator. But it's a very interesting question. I'm not saying it can't have an impact.
I swear it can have an
interesting
impact.
question.
I swear it can have an impact. Because even though the toddler in the incubator, it's not even a toddler. It's nothing. It's like a little lump of flesh, right? If you have it in your hands, it doesn't even weigh anything. A little life form. And at that moment already, the brain is developing, and all the influences from its surroundings having an impact on this development. It must be. I'm not a doctor, by the way, but I'm pretty sure about this one.
Okay.
Is it the understanding that makes the brain go in another direction when it has one direction to go in its involvement?
Is there a significant difference between someone who developed CPTSD because of one of those three household styles versus someone who developed CPTSD from a combination? Especially if all three situations are, yeah. So I think the answer is basically yes. So here's the thing to understand about trauma. So what we know about trauma is that trauma shapes you. And we know that the way that it shapes you causes problems later in life. That's how we define trauma. So negative events shape us all the time. But if it doesn't cause a negative impact, we don't diagnose someone with like PTSD. So there's research on things like post-traumatic growth where you can go through something traumatic and you can end up positive. Now, this is where I think the treatment of trauma is fun, right? So like I find it clinically enjoyable. I know it's kind of weird to say, but like I find it intellectually engaging. I find I have a lot of compassion. I find a lot of like growth, and it gives me like positivity to see people overcome their trauma. So I find the experience to be very like enjoyable, gratifying.
This statement I like very much,
and what we
because
know
he's
is
in the
that
field,
the way
he's
in
living
which
it.
you're busted will shape the way you're busted, right? So like if you have a combination of different traumatic things that can result in like something new or something different or a combination of the above. Now, I don't know that one is necessarily worse than the other, but we absolutely see like nuances of each of these manifestations, and that's very common. And so then it's just an issue of like seeing which manifestation is common when. So like learning to think about the future again, like we want to do that. And we want to learn how to like reward our autonomy. Like we can do all of the above. It's not either or. So what if I don't have the safety to want to calm down? I wouldn't be as safe anymore if I were calm. So that's a very common experience of people who have been traumatized. Safety to want to calm down.
By the way, guys, I'm going to activate subtitles.
Wouldn't be as safe anymore if I were calm. So that's a very common experience of people who have been traumatized. So if you look at research on trauma, what we find is that the most important thing for healing trauma is safety. So we don't talk about this much as clinicians when we lecture about trauma, but basically we know that like physical safety and even to a certain degree emotional safety is very, very important. So the first step to treating any trauma is not emotions or anything like that, is actually physical safety. That's number one. And the reason for that is very simple. If you're not physically safe, your hypothalamus will be pumping out something called CRH. CRH is corticotropin releasing hormone. The CRH will go to your pituitary glands and will release ACTH. So your pituitary will pump out ACTH, which will cause your adrenal cortices to pump out cortisol. As long as you have cortisol and other kinds of sympathetic nervous system or stress hormones floating through your system, you cannot rewire and you cannot heal. Like physiologically, it is very difficult to do. So if we look at the role of these stress hormones aren't about picking up the pieces.
These are the most important hormones, adrenaline and cortisol.
Through the day. So what you find in people who have an experience of trauma, who don't feel safe and aren't safe, is that it is very hard to work on the trauma because their brain is not in a neuroplastic state.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So let's understand this, okay? So our brain develops or becomes increasingly neuroplastic when we sleep. So if we look at like memory consolidation, we have short-term memory and we have long-term memory. Our short-term memory, which is kind of like our RAM, gets rewritten into our long-term memory, which is kind of like our hard drive, when we sleep. So we do this process of memory consolidation. This involves a lot of neuroplasticity because we're forming new memories. Now, if we look at sleep, stress hormones impede sleep. So sleep is when we build a lot of tissues and grow a lot of neurons. I mean, we don't grow too many neurons, but BDNF increases, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, I think increases in sleep as well. So our brain rewires when we sleep. When we're stressed out, it runs against the sleeping signals. So we have these pro-sleep states where our brain does things like rewire, heal, and learn. And then we have these anti-sleep states, which is like survive, stay awake, and survive. And so we absolutely need safety as part of the healing process. So I think the first step to healing trauma is creating safety. Now that becomes...
That is a rough realization I just have. I was not able to sleep well until I left my home and got my own place. I was constantly stressed, traumatized throughout all my teens. The level of messed up is insane, right? That is a rough one, dude. And it makes so much sense. Having stress hormone is so counterproductive for a lot of things. Right now, I'm wondering if it reduces inflammation. I'm very interested in that currently. But I believe so, because people are getting cortisol as an injection to treat illnesses or illnesses that would cause inflammation. And then this is a whole other topic. If it's not the case, which I do believe it is, there's a whole market for it. Where people with bad eating habits as well, no exercise, and most likely smoking, it all contributes to a bad sleep. And then if you're stressed at the same time, that is crazy. But if you are avoiding stress and you only have these bad habits, then suddenly you get injected with the stress in its pure form of cortisol. What are we doing? What is it? It's a medication. It's an industry. That is a whole other topic, very fascinating.
becomes a little bit tricky because sometimes because of the nature of our hyperarousal and the way our nervous system is wired, the lack of safety is not quite as external as we think it is. I'm not saying it isn't. I mean, there are people who are in abusive households where it's unsafe objectively. But the tricky thing about trauma is that we carry that lack of safety within us. So there's a balance between creating external safety, and even when you create external safety, it's not like internally you'll feel safe right away. So there's a process of letting yourself rewire to feeling safe as well. Great question. We're going to take one more. When I was born, I was left crying for 2 hours in an incubator before someone held me and took me to my mother. I blame my constant anxiety for this. So that level of specificity, I don't really have much comment on. I would feel very, very surprised to learn
Every baby is crying, though, no?
That singular event is responsible for a persistent adult condition. Would be very surprised.
I swear to God, I hope this person does not have this condition because of this situation that happened. But honestly, man, every newborn is gonna cry. Okay, 2 hours might seem a little excessive, but how does he know it's 2 hours? I think it's a...
So the other thing that we know is that isolated
It's a troll,
events
maybe.
in childhood, kids
No, but
are
I
quite
guess he
resilient.
takes it serious, right?
So the cool thing about kids is that even if they go through a traumatic experience, it is very common for them to bounce back. And that's because kids their brain is very neuroplastic. Even their body is quite changeable, right?
Yeah,
so
if they get into
kids
accidents,
their neurons
but otherwise
can
everything is
still grow
good.
in ways that adults can't. They can create new neurons. Most of what happens is pruning, but so their healing capacity is way bigger because they're not in read-only mode. They're still in write mode, so that a lot of them children can heal very easily. So I'd be surprised. I'm not saying it's not possible, and that's something to work through with a clinician. Interesting. Thank you for sharing.
He's so professional about the question. I like it.
Do we know if EMDR is effective for CPTSD? I personally think it is, but there's a lot of controversy around EMDR.
Before he continues with EMDR, I do not immediately know what it is, but I do feel it's like where they do these hand movements in front of your face, and I am so interested in that. I was gonna check it out at some point this week. Basically, I could talk out my ass right now and not really know what's up, and he's gonna maybe correct it. But basically, you have a special kind of pattern that if your eye follows that movement, or the hand of, or whatever it is that the therapist makes, it is like a puzzle that your brain is solving. That is so fascinating, and I do believe in it being able to heal stuff, because everything is possible nowadays, anyways.
And we don't have many studies on what's effective for CPTSD. So my problem has been so good at masking my CPTSD that they don't find the issue. Any tips as to opening up? Yeah, I'd start with the body. Right? That's why we kind of talked about that. So I don't know if this kind of makes sense, but the way that we've outlined our approach to trauma, and especially in the guide, the reason it's built that way is because we have gotten these questions over and over and over. And I have this problem. I have this problem. I have this problem. I have this problem. What about this? 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 So what we did is took all those questions and say, okay, if we take all of these questions, how can we understand trauma that accounts for all of these? So why do we have a video about paralysis of initiation and impulsivity? Because we recognize that there's an overlap between the symptomatology of ADHD and trauma. We recognize that people with trauma have difficulties that feel like ADHD. So that's in there. We recognize that people have difficulty opening up. We recognize that people have difficulty feeling their emotions. That's why we start with the body. right? And that's why relationships is at the very end. So start with the body.
What does it mean, start with the body, though? Particularly?
Okay.
Physical? Or I don't get it.
How do I bring up CPTSD up to my therapist? I resonated with this topic a lot, but I feel like it's not my place to initiate the conversation. There it is, right? So, like, I can say it's absolutely your place to initiate the conversation. That's your job. That's why you're going, right? You're going for your benefit, not the therapist's benefit. If it helps you, by all means, bring it up. That doesn't work, though, right? So one of the manifestations of CPTSD is you feel like it's not your place. You feel like deferring to the other person. You feel like following someone else's lead. See, when we don't have a well-formed sense of identity, we don't feel like we deserve very much. It's not my place. When it's absolutely your place, like that's the definition of your place. The reason that therapy is the one place where you get to go for you and for no one else. So whatever you want is fair game. Right? I mean, within reason. It's like the therapist can say no. But it's very common. So notice that. Notice that your desire to not even bring it up, or your feeling that it's not my place to bring it up, could be a manifestation of the very problem itself. And just notice that. And then try your best to bring it up. Right? You can even share. So one last technique that I'll give y'all is if you're having, so this is like pro technique in therapy, okay? So sometimes we feel embarrassed bringing something up because there's a lot of emotional energy here. There's shame, there's guilt, there's like, oh my God, this kind of kinky thing kind of turns me on, and like,
Oh, the kinks, you can't share them. I swear, if you want help from somebody, if you're going to a physician even, you can also talk about your mental stuff. But in this place, there is no... You're only damaging yourself. You're only hindering yourself. You're slowing yourself down if you don't open up. And you have to open up like a book, dude. No hiding, no nothing.
oh my God, I have these kind of thoughts.
It's all private anyways. What are you scared of?
Like tackling that emotion and being vulnerable. So instead, what I want y'all to do is go one layer above it. So what you can say to your therapist is, there's something that I feel ashamed of that I don't feel comfortable bringing up with you. So you go meta, right? So you're not bringing up the thing, you're saying, this thing is hard for me. And then even if that's too hard, you can go one level above. I want to bring something up with you. I want to bring up that I'm scared to talk about something. But even that's hard to talk about. So what we want to do is move away from the emotion and put that out there, right? Say like even one step removed. You don't have to talk about the shameful thing. There's something that I'm ashamed of that I don't want to talk about. You can just say that. And then it's the therapist's job to take over. Like that's what we're good at, right? That's what we're trained for. We're trained to help you do that. And even when we're like, so there's a good technique in therapy called going meta, right? So, and that's when there's something like, so if someone says like, hey, I'm here for therapy, I want to focus on this, but I don't want to talk about this. And so what do we do in therapy? We don't say, okay, screw you, we're going to talk about that anyway because you don't want to talk about it. No, what we do is help me understand why you don't want to talk about it. Totally fine. We don't have to talk about it. Just, can you give me a little bit of context? Cool. And then you can bring it up later. So then it's your therapist's job to get there if you want to talk about it. You can say, hey, I want to talk about this thing, but I'm too embarrassed and I'm going to shut down. Okay. How do I explain my CPTSD to a family member that has expressed that she wants to help but doesn't really understand the gravity of my issues? Honestly, like I'd send them this video. Right? So one thing that's starting to happen is that people are starting to share some of our content, like not for themselves, but like they're like, you know, we had this video about autism and gender identity. We had a video about relationships with BPD, with people with borderline personality disorder. And so we're seeing a lot of like sharing going on. So, you know, a lot of people struggle to convey what we convey. Don't convey it. just share. And like, I don't know if y'all get this. I cannot remember the last time. I know that like all content creators are like, hey, if you like the video, like, subscribe, and share. I can't remember the last time. I mean, I've done it before, right? So maybe on like why men, the male suicide or why therapy sucks for men. There are a couple of videos that we've done, lectures we've done, streams that we've done, where I've asked y'all to share things. I don't ask y'all to share things. Like, you know, sure, it helps us, but like we're not here for us. We're here for you. And that's why I don't ask y'all to like, subscribe, or share. The only time I ask y'all to do it is when I think it benefits you or someone else who may need help. So this is one of the rare times where I would say the whole reason we do this and we store these is so that y'all can share it with other people.
I'm so thankful.
So like if you don't know, like if like let's say you watch a video about BPD and you realize, holy crap, I could have BPD. This is what it's like to be in my shoes. I think you should absolutely share that with someone who you're in a relationship with and be like, this person kind of explains what my experience is like in a way that I can't quite explain it. Right? Or something about addiction or whatever. Like if you're a gifted kid and your parents tell you that you have all the potential in the world and if you just tried harder, send them our gifted kids as special needs video. Right? So we're here as a resource for your benefit. That does not just mean you're the only one that has to watch us. So if we explain a concept in a way that it would be useful for someone in your life to understand, then you should share our videos. But once again, that's not so that we can increase our views by 0.01%. That is because it benefits you. That's why you should share. Or if it benefits someone else. Make sense?
So guys, don't forget to sub, like,
Would
and
you
comment.
consider Spanish subtitles?
And share.
I think we're working on it. Oh, what a beautiful question. So we're at time for the day, but I'm going to leave y'all with one last question that I love. There's two questions. Man, these are so best meditation for trauma. We're past time, so I don't have time or energy to do meditation today, for which I apologize. But in the trauma guide, we've got, hold on a second. Let me tell y'all. We have a whole new...
One thing that I never understood or got to work was meditation. Because in my head, there is always a shitstorm. And when everything is still around me, which is kind of the basis for having a meditation session going, I go crazy, right? When washing the dishes and I'm not listening to anything, I'm going crazy. I'm trying to sleep and not listening to anything. It's very hard. And it still is. And in most of my youth, I always had to have like a MP3 player back then it was. That's how old I am. Even a CD player I lived through. But meditation, I never really got it. This idle time that your brain can process something sounds very good. But in nowadays as well, everything is so fast, you don't even have time to have time. Because you actually have all the information you want at a finger click. And then you actually get used to this kind of speed, which life currently is. And it's only getting faster. How are we to keep up? When you're walking and you're taking a little walk outside, you might listen to an audiobook or something at the same time. Because you're trying to use the time. Because why would you listen to an audiobook when then you're at home at the PC and you're doing something else? Yeah, you could listen to it at the same time as well. Most likely you will. Most likely you're gonna watch something, you're gonna listen to something else at the same time, talk to your friends at the same time, play a game at the same time. It is crazy. The world has become really fast. And honestly, as much as I like to fantasize about being able to meditate, I would not even consider it. because there's just so much to do, always, that I wouldn't know if I could find the time. And to be even more honest, I don't even know that I want to find the time. But this is only because I wouldn't know how it feels to meditate and what kind of a positive outcome it would have. Meditation can be something else as well. I guess for me it's exercise. Yeah. Let's see what he says. Maybe he's gonna add something of this kind to it.
New stock of meditations. Oh, here. Oh, damn it. I just realized that people are telling me. These are so good. Okay. We're going to answer one question, then we're going to try to speed run a couple more. So, first thing is, what was I talking about? I don't even remember. Brain death is setting in. Oh, meditations. So we have a bunch of meditations. Let me count. So we have I think about 10 meditations. Okay, no, one is an overview. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 11 meditations in the trauma guide. So definitely check those out. I think they're great. They'll build on the existing meditations that we've taught y'all. And I just ran into, will trauma ever go away? Quick answer to that one. Possibly, actually. So we know that like a lot of people will heal from trauma without any overt intervention. So the cool thing is, like, if you look at the body, like the body and brain, like, heal. That's what we're designed to do. So the short answer is it's very possible that you don't need to do a damn thing and it'll fix itself, or your relationships will organically fix it. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't adopt that strategy, though. There's another question of how do we address the sources of trauma out in the world and who is responsible for doing so? That's a lovely question. I love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. It's way beyond the scope of what we have time for today. So I think this is actually, that's in the guide. What am I saying? So I was going to say, so we can absolutely talk about it. But I think talking about karma is a very good exploration of this topic. So over on the membership side, we had a couple of great karma lectures. We talk about karma in the trauma guide because there is this whole idea of, like, you know, everything we're talking about is fixing you, but what about the outside world? So I think that's a very important discussion. But
I think karma is very interesting for me as well. Because I know it's not a real thing, but it still somehow is working.
Okay, so can you recommend specific meditation techniques? There's about 10 of them in the guide, which, by the way, is why we built a guide, right? Because, like, I don't know if this makes sense, but there's no way we can get to even 1% of the questions that y'all ask, or even share with y'all 1% of, like, the meditations that y'all can try and things like that. That's why we build these stock resources that are way more in depth. I don't know if this kind of makes sense, but, you know, filming of the trauma guide is like, the filming is a week of me showing up at a studio at like 8 o'clock and leaving at 5. And cameras are rolling for like 9 hours a day for like 5 to 7 days. And so it's like, you know, like, in order to duplicate that, I would have to stream for like 50 hours in a week. So I just can't do that. Like, my voice cannot handle it. So that's why we build these resources, because there's just no way we can get to everything. But it's
is
very,
it for free?
like,
What is
the
it
reason
talking
we
about?
edit and everything is so that, like, it's very high yield. So how do you start to build your own sense of self? I think it's, first of all, cleaning out negative emotions and then starting to string together emotional experiences into a new narrative. There's a whole video about narrative and identity, and constructing a positive narrative is something that can be taught. It is a skill, and it is something that has been shown to improve outcomes in trauma. So, like, narrative is an important part, absolutely. So there's just a way to do it. How to not be one of the 69% to resist trauma treatment. Great question. So remember that those people are not resistant to trauma treatment. They are resistant to a particular intervention for a particular diagnosis. And we know the cause for that resistance is a high level of dissociation. We have other things that improve dissociation. So there's a certain model of trauma treatment called STARE.
Nice.
And the whole model is based on first you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this. And when you do it that way, that's like a comprehensive approach that checks most of the boxes and deals with this concept of resistant to trauma treatment. Is CPTSD curable, or do you have to deal with it for the rest of your life? I personally believe that for, I would say, most people, it is basically curable. I know it's a bold statement. I may be dumb. I may be wrong. But I personally believe that trauma for most people can be cured. I do not believe that for schizophrenia. So I think we know that some of our psychiatric diagnoses are like progressive and more biologically driven. So schizophrenia is a really good example of that one. But like trauma is different. I've seen people basically be in complete remission or cure from CPTSD before. I'm 50 and never felt happy. How long into treatment for PTSD will I be before I can start to feel? The short answer is I don't know.
50 and never been happy.
The thing about trauma treatment is that your mileage may vary.
If you're 50 now, you are from the boomer generation that never talked about feelings. Never. It was a taboo. And if you talked about feelings, you would get, what's it called? Ostracized for it. So that people would not really want to listen or even think it's a fake thing. A mental wound. What is that? Man, we have come a long way, but people in their 50s nowadays, that is rough, dude. That is the generation that is coming from a household in which, you know, this one picture where this meme where this old guy, he's yelling at his son or daughter saying you're stupid, and then they yell at their children saying you're stupid, you're not enough. It's like even before that, you know, when there wasn't really anything of that sort that we have nowadays. When it was a thing to get hit in school by the teacher with a ruler, where physical abuse was a standard answer to a lot of problems. So that generation has it really rough, man. I really feel for this person. My empathy is triggered, and I can only hope, man, it's gonna get better. And we know it is, because look at us. We're watching videos about mental health. More and more people are doing it. Spread the word. Sub, like, and comment and share. No, but really, let's see what he says here.
So if we look at most treatments, they tend to be effective somewhere around the 8-week mark. And you'll have some gains up until about the 16-week mark. And then beyond that, you can absolutely have gains. But generally speaking, it takes 2 to 4 months for treatments to start to be effective. That being said, feeling happy...
My therapy is going to be expensive as fuck.
Let me actually pull up a paper. Feeling happy is not necessarily one of the things that we look at in trauma treatment, right? So we'll like measure some things, but we don't necessarily look at happiness. So like this is the kind of thing where, you know, the short answer is your mileage may vary. The slightly longer answer, which is super cool, is complex post-traumatic stress disorder is an independent diagnosis, differences in hedonic and eudaimonic well-being between CPTSD and PTSD. I imagine that the answer to your question is somewhere in this paper. So what this paper talks about is that there are two kinds of happiness. There is dopaminergic happiness and there is serotonergic happiness. Dopaminergic happiness is what we call hedonism, hedonic well-being. So this is like my ability to experience pleasure. Eudaimonic happiness is a sense of contentment, peace, or internal happiness that is not tied to a particular thing. So if I like
a baseline of well-being,
coaster, that will increase my hedonic happiness. Playing a video game will increase my hedonic happiness. Watching pornography will increase my hedonic happiness.
And then being safe and stuff is the eudon.
But especially with things like video games and pornography, it can decrease my eudaimonic happiness. So this is my sense of like peace and joy in life. Unfortunately, CPTSD is associated with impairments in both and less of both. So what we do know is that if you get treated for this stuff, both of those indices will improve. And what we also know is that in CPTSD, eudaimonic unhappiness is more profound than hedonic unhappiness. So if you have a history of trauma, your ability to engage in pleasure is modulated or impaired, but your ability to feel at peace and feel joy in life is even more impaired. So the pleasure circuitry is somewhat intact.
True.
The sense of peace circuitry is more screwed up.
I speak for myself.
So let's just kind of take a quick look at, I think I remember that correctly. See, these findings indicate that core symptoms of CPTSD might hinder individuals from living fulfilling lives. That's what eudaimonic happiness is. Okay? It's bizarre. So if you guys are wondering, so like putting together this deep dive, first thing is for every hour that I spend telling y'all about something, there's 4 hours of stuff that I leave out. And this is why I like doing such a deep dive, because it's like cool, because if y'all ask a question, it turns out there's literally at least one paper that talks about happiness and trauma. Right? So there's good news and bad news here. The short answer is, how long will it take you to feel happy? I would say give it at least 6 months. But there are also other caveats there, right? Because whether you feel happy or not can be somewhat independent of your treatment. So I had a patient who once came in and I treated them for major depressive disorder. And after about 2 years, they said, I don't feel like I've gotten any better. And I was like, well, what do you mean by that? Because your life has improved. We've talked about all the things that have improved. And he's like, I still feel depressed every day. And after tunneling down into it, that's when we realized this isn't depression. This is unhappiness. And the presence of depression is different from the absence of unhappiness. These are two separate things. The treatment of depression moves us towards neutral. Learning to be happy is its own separate path. This is oftentimes more along the spiritual line as opposed to the clinical line. And in trauma, that can be true as well.
I'm so far from the spiritual world.
Happy, we absolutely know that things like the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex are impaired in CPTSD, which prevents people or makes it difficult for them to feel positive emotions. Instead, they feel numbness. When they go to a birthday party for them, when they go to their birthday party, everyone is happy and celebrating, and you're just like, I don't feel anything.
That's me.
Like, it's not bad, but I don't feel joy. And that's where there is, so treating CPTSD will help with eudaimonic well-being. Absolutely. But part of that treatment is a little bit more spiritual, and you can do that on your own, right? So you can learn to appreciate. You can start practicing gratitude. There are other ways to engage, to increase.
I'm on this path, actually, without realizing it. The gratitude thing is a big thing. It helps me coping so much. And it is very easy to practice. You just look at an article of a third world country. You look at a clip. You look at news of people being in war, living in the worst conditions. Then look at yourself. You're living in an isolated apartment. You have internet, clean water. It is so easy to be thankful for this. And so easy to think, to stop, halt, and reflect and say, I'm so thankful that I have this. And the other people do not have it. They don't even have the ability, the access. Immediately, you will find gratitude. Immediately, if you think about these things. In the modern Western civilization, it is more likely that we create fake scenarios and artificial problems. We're making our own undoing, creating our own misery. That is so interesting.
Increase your happiness that don't have to do so much with CPTSD. Now, I suspect some of these techniques will be difficult for people with CPTSD because the parts of their brain that normally these techniques would activate may somehow be impaired. So I recently did a lecture on the neuroscience of enlightenment, and that may be showing up on one of our channels soon. Maybe, maybe not. I'm not sure.
And neuroscience on enlightenment.
But the short answer is your mileage may vary. It is a very good question. There's a lot at play between trauma and happiness and fulfillment. Treatment will help. But even if it doesn't help, don't give up. I guess that's what I mean to say. That the treatment of an illness is not the same as creating happiness in your life. And sometimes that is an independent process. And on that
new fear unlocked. I'm not depressed, I'm unhappy.
that note, we're at time for the day. Way past time. So it's been an absolute pleasure to be here today with y'all.
What a guy, man. What a guy.
Let me think about... I just want to show y'all a couple of things before we close out. So for those of y'all that are joining us late, we do have a trauma guide that is going to be coming out soon that is available for pre-order. I know we discussed a lot of dense neuroscience today, so we're also improving things in that dimension.
Okay. That was a great video. Learned a little bit more than I expected from a Q&A. That is great. The mind is fascinating. You don't learn any of this in school. None of it. I kind of believe it would be cool if you do, if you did. Having access to internet and being curious about these things made me catch on really fast. But I never did a deep dive. Still, like 10 years ago already, I started looking up these videos, trying to figure out what's wrong with me. Why am I like this? Why am I not like that? And it's only getting better. The resources we are getting is only getting better. So that is a great thing. But other than that, nobody talks about it. It's a taboo still. And it's so many people unaware and just living their life like an NPC. And that is crazy to me. And I wish I would have been more fascinated by this or been more exposed to this when I was younger. Cause man, do you know how when sometimes something is interesting for you and you know, if I only had the time, I would have studied this. This would have become part of my profession, maybe. So I'm very interested and curious about this. I was always a science geek. The most interesting thing for me was food science, nutrition. Because I do move around in the physical realm a lot, you know. Spiritual, however, I was always not interested in. Never talked it bad or anything, but it just wasn't for me. Still fascinating. Nice video. I like it.